Kia good morning everyone, Richard here, welcome back to the channel. Today we are looking at another lens from Viltrox. This is the Viltrox AF 25mm f1.7. It is an autofocus APS-C lens for Sony E, Nikon Z and Fujifilm X. Price is also very affordable at $176 US. Usual disclaimers before we start. Viltrox sent me a sample for this review and I do not have to return the sample after the review. But as usual, I did not receive any money and Viltrox didn't tell me what to say or what not to say in this video. If you want to purchase this lens after watching this review, you can support me by using the affiliate link in the video description below. We'll start this review by looking at the image quality first, and I'm going to compare this Viltrox with the TTArtisan 23mm f1.8 as a few of you have requested me to do this comparison in my TTArtisan review. The TTArtisan is slightly wider than the Viltrox and the maximum aperture is slightly slower. Here are two photos shot at the maximum aperture for each of these lenses, but otherwise the exact same camera settings and the position of the camera was also exactly the same. The Viltrox has a slightly tighter field of view and tiny bit brighter. The white balance setting was also the same for both photos, and it seems the Viltrox is slightly warmer than the TTArtisan. But all these differences are really small. However, one thing that is quite different is the price. The Viltrox is $176, while the TTArtisan is $127. So the TTArtisan is almost 30% cheaper than the already very affordable Viltrox. So anyway, let's have a look at the image sharpness first. All the test photos in this review were shot using a 40MP Fujifilm X-H2. All the test photos were shot in RAW format and then converted to JPEG using Adobe Lightroom with default settings. If you look at the center of the photo, the Viltrox is very sharp at the maximum aperture already, even though I'm testing it with the 40MP Fujifilm X-H2. I previously thought the TTArtisan is quite good in terms of center sharpness, but now putting the photos from these two lenses side by side, the Viltrox is noticeably sharper. Since the Viltrox is already so sharp at f1.7, so stopping down the lens to f2.8 doesn't really make the Viltrox any sharper. But at f2.8, the TTArtisan's center sharpness improves a lot, so it's almost as good as the Viltrox now. Stopping down these lenses further doesn't really make any difference to the center sharpness until we reach f11 and diffraction starting to soften the images. We'll now look at the corner. At the maximum aperture, the Viltrox is already pretty sharp. I'm very surprised because it's not very common for a lens that is less than $200 to have such good corner performance at the maximum aperture. If you have watched my TTArtisan 23mm lens review, you will remember I already said the corner of the TTArtisan is quite soft. And this is now even more noticeable when I compare it with the Viltrox. There is a big difference between the corner sharpness of these two lenses. The TTArtisan remains quite soft until we reach f5.6, then it becomes sharper. But Viltrox corner is just sharper than the TTArtisan. The Viltrox also doesn't appear to have much field curvature, as the center and corner sharpness is pretty much the same no matter I focus at the center or corner of the photo, even when I was shooting at f1.7. The minimum focus distance of the Viltrox AF 25mm lens is 0.3 meter. The maximum magnification is 0.11 times. TTArtisan's official minimum focus distance is also 0.3 meter, but I found I could focus slightly closer with the TTArtisan and that gives us a higher maximum magnification ratio. However, Viltrox has noticeably better sharpness at the maximum aperture when shooting at the minimum focus distance. Bokeh from the Viltrox lens is smooth and doesn't look too nervous. There could be a bit of cat's eye bokeh at the corner, but it only happens when your subject is at a very close distance. If I compare the Viltrox with the TTArtisan's bokeh is not as smooth as the Viltrox. The TTArtisan has a bit of highlight halo ring near the edge of the bokeh ball. So if you want bokeh with a bit more character, then TTArtisan will be your better choice. But if you just want smooth looking bokeh with minimum distraction, then Viltrox would be more suitable to you. Let's look at vignetting next. If I bring the raw files into Lightroom and export them with the default lens profile correction enabled, both lenses have noticeable vignetting at the maximum aperture. TTArtisan appears to have a little bit stronger vignetting. When I stop down the lens to f2.8, most of the vignetting disappear from the Viltrox, while the TTArtisan's vignetting still remain quite noticeable. Actually, for the TTArtisan, even if I stop down the lens all the way to f16, there is still a little bit of vignetting visible. And if I disable the profile correction, then vignetting would be a bit stronger with both lenses, but overall the Viltrox is still noticeably better than the TTArtisan in this area. Viltrox chromatic aberration control is alright. I can see a bit of color fringing in some photos, but nothing really serious. Comparing it with the TTArtisan, I think the TTArtisan has slightly better chromatic aberration performance. If you look at these local test photos, TTArtisan also seems to be slightly better than the Viltrox with less color fringing. Now let's look at these brick wall test photos. The Viltrox has a little bit of barrel distortion. TTArtisan also has some minor barrel distortion, but the amount of distortion seems to be slightly less than the Viltrox. For a budget lens, Viltrox lens flare performance is really quite good. I got very little amount of lens flare even when shooting into a bright light source. I don't have any real lens flare issues when shooting real world photos. Lens flare used to be TTArtisan's biggest weakness, but TTArtisan has made some big improvements recently. The TTArtisan has a little bit more ghosting, but to be honest, it is still very acceptable. If you want to have Sunstars in your photo, you need to stop down the lens quite a bit to around f8, and this is the same for both the Viltrox and the TTArtisan. And as you stop down the lens further, Sunstars becomes sharper and have longer tails. The tails from Viltrox Sunstars spread out a bit, while the TTArtisan is more pointy. So I prefer the Sunstars from the TTArtisan a little bit more. If you are a videographer, there is a very good reason to choose this Viltrox lens. The lens has very minimal amount of focus briefing. I see virtually no focus briefing when I change the focus between 1 to 20 meters, which usually there would be a bit of focus briefing visible when I do this kind of tests. And this is certainly the case with the TTArtisan. There has quite a bit of focus briefing that you can see when I repeat the same test. The design of this lens is very similar to the other recent APS-C Viltrox lenses. Actually, this Viltrox 25mm lens is exactly the same as the Viltrox 35mm f1.7 that we have reviewed just a little while ago. Even the lens hood is exactly the same. The lens is very compact, very lightweight, just around 170 to 180 grams depending on the lens mount. The design is pretty simple. It just has a focus ring. So there's no switches, there's no aperture ring. I know some Fujifilm shooters may want an aperture ring, but for the lens very affordable price, I think it is very understandable. The lens is mostly made of plastic, including the plastic lens hood, but it still has a metal lens mount with a USB-C port for firmware update. The front filter thread is 52mm. I don't think the lens is weatherproof, but overall the build quality is what I would expect for a well-made budget lens. This Viltrox definitely feels a lot more plasticky if I compare it with the TTArtisan, which has a metal body. The cheaper TTArtisan feels more premium than this Viltrox. This lens uses STM stepping motor for autofocus. Autofocus performance is solid. It's quiet, smooth, and the autofocus is responsive. Autofocus works very well and face detection works perfectly fine with my Fuji camera. Video autofocus also works very well. It's smooth, fast, and reliable. Reviewing this Viltrox 25mm f1.7 makes me realize how much Viltrox has improved in just a few years. The ASPC f1.7 lenses from a few years ago were not bad, but the size of those older Viltrox lenses were a little bit big for ASPC lenses. Image quality of those lenses were good overall, but with a few weaknesses. But now, with Viltrox's latest AS series lenses like this 25mm f1.7, Viltrox has not only managed to reduce the size of this lens, but also make some noticeable improvements to the image quality, and the price is still kept at very affordable level. At this price, it is really hard for me to complain about anything. I know some of you would want to have an aperture ring on the lens, and I've also mentioned about the plasticky construction, but if none of this concerns you, then this Viltrox AF 25mm f1.7 is a very good lens with very attractive price.